We will start this morning by having my fellow board members introduce themselves. Ms. Harris.
Good morning, everyone. Lynn Harris. I use she, her pronouns.
Good morning, Shebra Evans. Good to see everyone.
Good morning, Julie Yang. Good to be here in a rainy day. We're ready to work.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hands. That's unanimous with those present. All right, we're going to get started with our presentation on following up on the Capital Improvement Program public hearings. Mr. Hull.
Thank you. Welcome everyone today. So today is our second work session on the CIP for this year. The last work session we talked about some enrollment projections and some of the highlights that we'll be working through in this CIP. Today we're going to get into a little bit more of the specifics, and I will let Mr. Adams take it from here.
All right, good morning, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to present the second piece of the work session. So we're going to go through some of the things that were discussed at our public hearings, but also really just dive a little bit deeper into some of the county-wides. Here with me are Ms. Kara Mijas and Ms. Shibasaki from facilities to work through the presentation and answer any questions along the way. So if we could just pull up the slides, we'll go right to the next slide and just go over the agenda. So as I mentioned, we'll cover, just do an update of the public hearings, just talk about where we are in some of the investigation in terms of what was presented, what was discussed. We'll go through the countywide projects. Just remember the countywide projects, we call them county-wides because they're just one individual project that's intended to cover pretty much issues and challenges and facility upgrades across all schools. So that's why we consider them county-wides. We'll dive a little bit deeper into it, talk about the funding and where the recommendation is focused in certain areas. Obviously, we'll cover some other facility issues. We call them issues, but it's just different elements within the CIP that are being recommended to address. And we'll talk about why and answer any questions on that. And then, obviously, we talked about this a couple times, just review high level the capital maintenance, comprehensive maintenance plan. And really connect the dots between what's happening in the operating side with maintenance and that of what we're seeing on the capital. And then, as we talked about the first work session, go through a few more of the nuances associated with Northwood and Woodward, and then briefly just touch upon the boundary study in terms of what to expect at the next board meeting. So, next slide. Next. So again, here's the timeline. We've made it through the first presentation and work session, 2 public hearings today. We're at the second work session. We have tentatively scheduled November 13th for the public hearing if needed. I do not anticipate that will be a needed hearing, and then we obviously go to November 16th for the final decisions. And just remind board members, the final decisions are basically a vote on a resolution. That resolution is basically then your CIP that you would request of the county executive and then ultimately over to the county council. All right, next slide. And I will turn it over to Ms. Shibasaki.
Hi, good morning. So the first item is ADA compliance for the MCPS project, and this is to address continuing the removal of the highest priority barriers identified by the assessment done between the year of 2017 and 18. And then during the summer of 2023, which is this year, a total of 455 barriers were addressed. And then most of them through the major capital project, but rest of them are standalone improvement project. And then in this CIP funding will address the improvement of Burning Tree Elementary School ADA challenges. As we all heard during the testimony that they have that school has a split level classrooms. So each classrooms you have to go down and up the stairs. So we are trying to address that ADA issues by probably creating corridors to connect all the classrooms without stairs. So we're going to be starting the planning for that project soon. And then the next one is the restroom renovation. This fund will address the existing bathrooms throughout the school systems. And then the additional fundings were recommended to expand single-user bathroom, which is for the all the gender-neutral bathroom used to be called, but we now call the single-user bathroom. And then currently, the 20 elementary schools, 13 middle schools, and 11 high school has a traditional single-user bathrooms. And then currently, 23 schools are under design to have these single-user bathrooms. But we also have the pilot programs to have a new way of having the single-user bathroom, which is like individual stalls are more like enclosed, having more privacies, so anyone can go in and out, but having more like a visibility from the corridor, so there is no security concerns and stuff like that. So we are actually undergoing through the design phase through the capital project. So the Woodward High School and some of the new Crown High School have those designed single-user bathrooms.
And I would also say we're even looking at it at the elementary school level. So Joe and Lelek, we're also looking at this single-user, multiple stall model. I know Ms. Harris has brought this up many times in terms of something that we should look at. So we actually hope for Poolsville that this will be in service here in the very near future so that we can start to build that out and improve it over time. So we are very excited about that. But this restroom renovation project is very important. I know board members have talked about this for years, and obviously superintendent's recommendation also prioritizes that as well.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I would just add quickly that St. Paul Public Schools in Minnesota has done amazing groundbreaking work in this area since, 2015. And so they provide us a real roadmap for how to do this work well. And, we're not really blazing a trail there. We're kind of following along one that's already been blazed for us. So.
I just got to say, St. Paul Public Schools, that's where I went to school. Yeah.
All right, so next slide, please. So the next categories are the building modification program improvements and the early childhood centers as individual projects. So building modification and program improvements, which we call BIMPI. Again, we have little names for everything, but so that's actually a project that's been very important for us over the years. And this is one where we obviously go into existing schools and adapt spaces to new programs, evolving programs, growing programs. We've seen a lot of work over the years in areas of special education. When we actually go back and look at the amount of work, the amount of classrooms that have been added through special education, it's pretty significant. We typically are partnering with them to add about 40 to 50 different spaces every summer. And programs like BIMPI are involved in that work. BIMPI also is the area where we have focused on some of our pre-kindergarten work. While we do have early childhood centers, the BIMPI project has been integral in going into existing schools and creating pre-K spaces from existing spaces. So again, this has been a really critical project for us to be able to adapt to the changing landscape in education. You will see it only shows for 2 years in the CIP. I wanted to highlight this. This is a long-standing request of county council. And the reason being is that, again, it's to navigate the changing landscape of education and be able to adapt our schools to it. And the idea is that, we really focus on those first 2 years where, again, the first 2 years of the CIP being the most important, and the last 4, with it being a bit of an unknown, not just adding money in the out years just arbitrarily without having an idea of what we're going to do. You will hear a little bit about this. I believe, there are some of the county executive is requesting that we add money for programs like like this all the way in the out years. But we do feel it's important to focus on the first 2 years, focus on what we know is going to be coming, and then maintain, that space for our larger long-term projects in the out years. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Mr. Adams, why is this in particular top of mind to county executive and county council? What has prompted that?
So there's been discussion in terms of, well, they don't just obviously look at the MCPS CIP, they look at all agency CIPs. And when they're developing their budget, they want to be able to make sure that if they put let's say a transportation project in FY28, that there will be enough room in FY28 when they get there to it. For us, we want to be able to make sure we put forward a budget that we can speak specifically to what projects are in those dollars. So our stance is from a budgeting standpoint. If that's something they're concerned about, certainly they can add room. They can add placeholders from a county budget standpoint to make sure it's balanced and preserved. But for us, for the integrity of the program, to be able to say, these dollars are going to this school, this program, we feel is very important to be able to explain what the money is versus just say, it's placeholder dollars and we're not sure where it will go.
Just a follow-up question here. For the bigger, wider world, could you remind people where the Parkside Elementary site is and what's currently there?
Sure. So the Parkside piece, moving into the early childhood centers, this was a project that was created a couple of years ago, obviously out of the blueprint vision, but we have been obviously working with HHS around pre-K spaces and other functions for many, many years. But this program started to focus on the Up County Early Childhood Center, and it has grown and evolved over time to start to create spaces. So what we're identifying here is an additional funding, not only for the Up County Early Education Center. The intent is to place that at Whetstone Elementary and align that with our major capital projects. So if you recall, we talked about Whetstone being rebuilt and then having sort of that dual purpose of the economies of scale of creating the Up County at Whetstone. The other piece to it is that we've been working to capture back existing facilities. Schools like Parkside Elementary. Parkside is located on Sligo Creek Parkway. It's actually in the Sligo Creek and Sims catchment area. If you recall, many years ago, that came back into our portfolio. We talked about maybe it being used as a holding facility or a swing space school. But the more we've worked with the early education, the blueprint team, this is an area where it makes sense to focus on that location and a facility like that as a center. Obviously, we talked about Burtonsville Elementary. When we relocate the new Burtonsville using existing Burtonsville as a East County early education center is something that's critical. We've also captured back additional facilities along the way. Forest Grove, Old Forest Grove Elementary, which is across from Holy Cross Hospital. We've just recently recaptured that. That came back to the board. There's a current tenant in there that actually serves pre-K. So partnering with them and see how we can either expand their services or we can supplement. But that's a critical facility. And obviously we've been in conversations around recapturing Kensington Elementary and other facilities along the way. So this has been important work. And while it is somewhat expensive to recapture facilities and then maintain and work through them, we do think it's important that we start to forward think and capture those facilities for a variety of purposes. So I believe I answered your question, but I want to give it the full picture of where we are from the early childhood center's perspective. So we would look at Parkside, which is in the down county consortium. We're looking at Burtonsville in the East County, and we're looking at Whetstone as part of the Up County, but the Germantown, Gaithersburg, basically Seneca Valley area.
And Parkside is currently used for what?
Parkside was previously the Parks Department headquarters. They relocated to the Wheaton headquarters. Right now, there's a pre-K program that resides at Woodland Elementary, so temporarily while Woodland is being rebuilt, they are in Parkside. Once Woodland opens up, they'll transition back, and then we'll be able to, assuming, knock on wood, assuming we're able to receive funds to do this work in the FY25, we would then go into Parkside and prepare it for an early childhood center for MCPS purposes.
Would that be the first one that would become available for preparation for early childhood?
No, we have two right now. McDonald Knowles, which is down in the Downtown Consortium area, and then we have the Up County Early Childhood Center. So Up County resided at Emory Grove when it was created, went to Watkins Mill High School. It went back to Emory Grove as we stand right now, and the idea is to build them a permanent space at Whetstone. So we would.
The ones you mentioned, Whetstone, Parkside, and Burtonsville, I'm just trying to get a sense for when they'll be operational.
Oh, yeah, so we have two that are operational under this plan. If approved, right, I mean, the funding has to be there in order to create these spaces. We would assume about a year duration to do construction at Parkside, so that could open up in FY26, which would be in calendar year 25. Beyond that, Burtonsville, that would be aligned to their project. Once Burtonsville moves into their new facility, which is recommended in calendar year 26, we don't believe there would be that much work that would be required to create that early education center at Old Burtonsville, so probably maybe that summer. And so we could potentially have these centers opening up in calendar years 25, 26, and 27, assuming these dollars are approved through the CIP process.
What plans do you have for the, I don't know what the name of the school was originally, but it's on Beach. Rochambeau was there most recently.
So
It's vacant currently.
yes, sure. So Rollingwood, we've had many conversations about Rollingwood. We actually are we are renovating and doing some grounds work as we speak. But we looked at that facility and its location. It doesn't necessarily fit well for a center for early education. So realistically, what we will do is to look for other educational tenants through an RFP process to be able to enter that space. We're also looking at Radnor holding facility. Radnor is one that's been vacant for a little while. It's a little on the fringe of the focused area that we're looking at. But we do believe that we may be able to take advantage of that facility for a portion of early education functions. So there are additional facilities that are out there that may come into play here. But the big centers, the ones that we're really focused on really larger comprehensive type programs, are the ones that we're identifying here today.
Mr. Adam, it's interesting because if you look at county geographically, Burtonsville, and you mentioned Whetstone is on this end, Emory Grove. So we do have a geographic area in the middle of the county that we need to maybe identify places for future learning centers.
Absolutely, that's the work. I believe we presented probably a month or two ago just around the focus areas of Blueprint, particularly early education. And you are correct, there are sort of swaths in the Rockville area and over that we are looking at. So we have facilities like English Manor that are used for primarily office types of functions. I know our infants and toddlers are in there, so some students come there, but we are looking at our facilities very differently to try to take full advantage of not only the facilities that we have, the geographic needs, but also realistically the county's office building vacancies. So again, we've said that over and over again. Office functions in schools, that's great, but if we have school functions that need to be in schools, we need to obviously look at that first and then see if there's opportunities to look for office functions and office spaces.
I was going to comment real quickly. COVID sort of took us off track because we were doing a really great job at trying to really think about where we're going to put our pre-K program, starting first Down County and then going to Emory Grove. So I'm glad that there has been thought to it. And did we start when when Hans Riemer was the council president. I feel like that's when we started getting a good bit of our money to go towards pre-K. And maybe at some point, Mr. Adams, as we get a little bit further into maybe like the next year or so, that it might be helpful for us to take that bus tour again, because we have new board members. Because what maybe the community doesn't remember is that we went around to all these different early centers that you're talking about, and the ones that we're going to use eventually, so people can get an idea of where they were located. So it might behoove us to do that again, since we have some new board members and not everybody was in attendance. Not every single board member was there, but the majority of us were there to see, the lay of the land, right? So I just want our community to know that, we're being thoughtful, and we've been thinking about this for a number of years, trying to plot out where to put the centers and being intentional. Yeah. So I just wanted to comment on that and just thank you all for the work that we're doing. We're trying to get our youngest kids into school buildings, right? We need them to be on track. Just wanted to add that.
Ms. Harris? Oh, okay. Finally, Robert, what about Rock Terrace, right next door? What is happening with that? Great location.
Yep. So there are several facilities that we continue to look at in terms of what makes the most sense. So the old Carl Sandburg, which is also in Rockville, Old Rock Terrace, once we rebuilt them and co-located, we've been looking at those facilities to see strategically what it makes the most sense. Rock Terrace, Old Rock Terrace, does make sense for possible use as a swing space school. It's actually large enough to be able to accommodate many of our elementary schools that are sort of in that higher level of a key facility indicator range. So we're looking at that from a perspective of, can that be used as a valuable swing space school? But there's obviously plan B, C, D that would follow based on the fiscal climate, right? I mean, I think that's a reality too that we're facing, is that if the money is not there to continue with just rebuilding and moving in our major capital projects from an elementary level, then we can start to really think differently about our facilities and take full advantage of them. So right now we're thinking it's going to be more for swing space. And we're also looking at locations for virtual academy. I mean, there's a lot of things that we're navigating at the moment that need space that obviously are dependent upon funding, but certainly are part of the discussion.
I think we can go on.
Okay. Next slide, please.
So the next one is HVAC replacement, and the fund in the first 2 years are increased for this CIP request because of the backlog of the HVAC project. And then if these funds are approved as requested, we are anticipating doing the following project for next 2 years. For summer 2024, we would like to do the Gaithersburg Middle School Phase 2, and Spark Matsunaga Elementary School Phase 1, Springbrook High School Phase 1, and Whitman High School Phase 2, and Charles Drew Elementary School project. And then for following year, summer 2025, we would like to do the Springbrook High School Phase 2, Whitman High School Phase 3, and Westland Middle School Phase 1, and Resnick Elementary School. And then a lot of projects are divided into like Phase 1 and Phase 2, and even like some of them are Phase 3. It's because of the funding and schedule. So we would like to continue those phasing to complete the upgrade for each school.
Could you be a little more specific about the Phase 1, 2, 3? Because yesterday at the board meeting, we did discuss the Watkinsville High School project, which was Phase 5.
Right.
Which was a very large ticket item. So what is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? What does that mean?
So the phases are just broken down into basically chunks of what we can do over a summer. The summer window is very short in terms of what you can do. So, we've worked with our contracting community just around what's sort of what can we push, but we don't want to be in a place where we push so hard that we risk a challenge of not opening or having the buildings ready to open. So they're broken down into manageable chunks for summer renovation work. And as you saw, the high schools, which are large, usually go into phase 4, 5, or 6, just to be able to have it a manageable process to be completed over a course of time.
Can you remind me Northwest and their temperature regulation problem? Where is that going to be addressed?
So we're only identifying the big, basically the full equipment replacements. Northwest is part of the control project. So actually, when we get to healthy schools, we're looking to see if we can take advantage of those funds from a state perspective. But it is funded through the HVAC replacement program. It's just not identified as a major state reimbursement project. So actually, the list is much larger when you get into smaller projects. This is just identifying those big ticket state aid type of projects.
But you do have some resources to address that and
yes,
plans?
It's already on the schedule to do that work over the summer. And I believe actually equipment being replaced in I think how it landed was in 2026. So we would start probably big phase 1 work at Northwest in 26, but we would do work between now and then to get a jump on it.
Mr. Adams, is there a place we can see that list? I'm just wondering, like, for example, school like Kensington Parkwood Elementary School, which run into temperature control issues when we have those hottest days this after school started. I want to see if they are on the list, or is there a way to get them on the list?
Sure. I think we've heard this a couple times in terms of what is the list of replacement. And again, we identify the 6-year list for the big state aid type of replacement projects. But the more we think about it, we've also created through these ongoing where are hot spots in terms of temperature control issues at our schools and what we're doing about those. So Kensington Parkwood would not be on a list like this, but to address some of their ongoing temperature challenges, they're very likely on a control replacement type of list. So where we are is I think we want to start to identify sort of the hot spots and be able to share that not only with the board, but also the communities, and then start to overlay and address what we're doing about it and the timeline associated with some of this work. So.
I happened to be visiting the school during those hot days, and I know there's a wing that didn't have good air condition, and actually it was very hot. They have to try to relocate the children.
And I would actually, I think this is an important time to bring this up. But during COVID, if some board members remember, we talked about this idea of changing our ventilation rates. We increased air exchanges. A lot of our existing equipment, especially on some of the warmest or coldest days, are not designed to handle some of those the higher ventilation that we're bringing in. And we've been trying to adapt and figure out how to optimize and navigate that. But we have faced some new challenges post-COVID with focusing on air exchanges. Again, when we put our SenseWare software in there, we're looking at it from a CO2 perspective, which is more occupancy. But that's a gauge of how much ventilation, so we bring in more ventilation in some cases. But if your cooling and heating load can't necessarily handle that increased ventilation, we do end up with some hot spots, cold spots, some temperature swings based on ambient climate conditions as well. So those are all important things that we also want to continue to get out into our schools, explain it, talk about it. There's still some that don't realize that there's a changeover process, meaning we switch from air conditioning to heat on a certain day. And if for some reason we have, let's say we switch to heat and we have a day where it's 75, 80, it's going to be hot in that school because the air conditioning is not on. So even just revisiting and explaining how these systems work and function is still really important to us, the work that I know we need to do.
Yep. And just following up on Ms. Silvestri's question about Northwest, I talked to Mr. Silber, who is the teacher who testified at our CIP hearing on Monday, and he had a question about, that you've got the air quality monitors in the classrooms, and how that data is used. Because his impression was that when we're looking at the effectiveness and looking at identifying HVAC needs that need to be remediated, were those individual. He was under the impression that a string of adjacent classrooms or a section of a building, the air quality monitoring data is just pooled or averaged. To look at, average temperature in a chunk of the room, in the chunk of a building, instead of individual conditions in individual rooms. One of the things I think he mentioned in his testimony was that per the association contracts, I believe, if a teacher's classroom can't be maintained at, at 75 degrees, or there's a break-off temperature, they're supposed to be offered an alternate location in the school. His classroom averages about 85 degrees, but he can't relocate because of the specialized courses he teaches, that technical music. It has very specific needs and equipment that the students use, so he can't go to a generic classroom. And just how does the monitoring work that we're doing inform how we decide and where we decide to tackle our HVAC issues?
Sure. So there's a lot to that question. I'm not necessarily going to go into the union contract, but what I would say is that we have provisions, spot coolers, temporary air conditioning, heating, those types of things that we could provide to any classroom. Understanding if it's a long-term or short-term issue is part of it, right? So a short-term issue that can be resolved rather quickly is something that we can go out and resolve it, and doesn't require individuals being moved all over a building. But in cases where it may be a longer outage, we have temporary equipment that we can apply, that we can install and have in place so that we do have consistent temperature conditions. In terms of the indoor air quality piece, the data is for every classroom, and I believe it's for every 15 minutes, but we are not publishing 15-minute data at our 12,000 classrooms. We're not doing it, right? So we average that out to show basically buildings, what's happening in a building. But we are getting that data from a facility standpoint and focusing in on where we need to, if we don't have work orders and we're seeing things that don't look normal, we'll create our own work orders, or we'll call the school and start asking some questions. But it is a tool to help us start to move from the reactive to the preventative maintenance that we will talk about later on in the comprehensive maintenance plan.
So it sounds like the persistent nature of the issues Mr. Silver was talking about should have been captured, and there should be a work order or something to bring in some of the temporary equipment you were talking about, so that day to day it's not 85 degrees, and that you've got two classrooms that are adjacent.
Sure, and I can't speak because I'm not in those classrooms every day, but I can tell you that I have looked at the data for Northwest, and while we have had challenges, overwhelmingly the building as a whole has been in range of where we want it to be. We have had incredible amount of work that has gone into that building over the past several years. It's sometimes a little slower than individuals would like, but it has had major progress. What happened a few weeks ago was, again, an outage of controls. We sent a team out to try to get it under control, but it happened. And I think there were some individuals that link that one issue to a longer term issue, but it's not the case. So again, I think communication is important here, because I think when things happen at schools, particularly around HVAC, it's just categorized quickly as this long-term issue, even though it could be a series of 5, 6, or 7 failures that happen on different equipment that we're addressing individually. But certainly I think we can spend some time out at Northwest and do some myth busting, and also explain what's happening and when.
Yeah, and I would just kind of pick up from where Mr. Adams left it there. Every classroom is incredibly important, and we want that to be an ideal learning space for our students. But as he said, 12,000 classrooms across 211 schools, and in these large, often older buildings, it is just a challenge with the temperature controls and the HVAC. So we're doing everything that we can. As we'll see in another slide or two here, we have about $500 million in deferred maintenance. That's maintenance that needs to be done that has not been funded. And so the team, Mr. Adams and his team, are doing absolutely everything they can to keep all 12,000 classrooms within range and in ideal learning conditions. But it is a challenge, and when we don't get the funding that we need, we do the best we can, and we bring in this temporary equipment, but we really need to have the funding to be able to address these concerns, and that just isn't always the case, unfortunately.
Can you restate the amount again?
It's about $500 million in deferred maintenance that we need funded, and that'll come up in another slide or two here.
And for the increases that you mentioned in bullet 1 there, funds in the first 2 years are increased. Is the total the same, and you've moved it to the first 2 years, or you've increased them, and if by how much?
Yeah, so we talked about the HVAC replacement as being part of susceptible to the reconciliation process where it's reduced. HVAC has been requested between 30 and 35 for many years, and historically we get 25, 20, even 18. So the request here is 35, which would be, I believe, up $5 million from last year. So the council has acknowledged that this is very important. So we hope that we can maintain this 35 million and then actually string it out to 27, 28, 29, 30 in the fiscal years as well. So that's what's needed, as Mr. Hall mentioned, from a deferred maintenance standpoint. 35 million is the minimum at this point, and may even be growing based on inflation, but that is a minimum number that we're asking for, and an increase from last year.
Thank you. Let's move on.
All right, next slide. Actually, we're diving right into the deferred maintenance slide. That's perfect timing. This is just a snippet from our work around our facility condition index evaluations. I coupled this with our PLAR program, which is our planned life cycle asset replacement, and that program has everything from our gym floors to generators, elevators, things that we talked about before. But what I want to show you too was this graph on the right, and it's a little complicated. It's not necessarily complicated, but it is something that I think is important to share, because it represents essentially how much money we need to maintain or have in order to do replacements over time. And really what that boils down to at the bottom chart there is that, as Mr. Hall mentioned, over $500 million in deferred maintenance when you look at all of our infrastructure. And based on this, about $100 million a year in order to keep up with that deferred maintenance. We can break that down into categories. I mean, we can show you exactly what you need for HVAC, windows, foundations, those sorts of things. But this is the minimum that we would need to just maintain. What's a little challenging with this, and I think Mr. Hall will attest to this, is that these numbers are based on present value. They're based on current, interest and inflationary numbers. As our inflation has gone up, actually these numbers have gone up. Even you don't have to do anything, right? They just go up purely based on inflationary pressures. So this is about 2 years old. I would venture to say, when we update this one, it's going to be a little bit higher. But this has been sort of the catalyst for us in terms of how we ask and the rationale behind why we ask for funding in certain categories. I would say, though, based on our work in this area of evaluation and condition assessment, one of the areas that is significantly lacking is finishes, casework, paint. Those elements that you see when you walk in, floor tile, ceiling tile. We really don't have a big funding source in those areas. PLAR is that area. The PLAR request for this following these first 2 years is $12 million. I would say in future CIPs, we are going to look to increase those because we do know that finishes are really important. When you walk into a school and you see fresh paint, you see fresh casework, you see furniture that that is appropriate for the current times, it makes a big difference. So at some point in the very near future, you're going to see more money applied to this particular program in order to address some of those issues.
I don't think I'm stupid, but I'm having a really hard time figuring out what this is. So the 2 to 22, is that 2002 to 2022? So we're looking at 20 years worth of stuff?
Correct. So the chart above is a 20-year window in terms of what, how much money we need to basically break even at the end, right? So the idea is that black line is where we are in our aging infrastructure. The further you dip down, the further you're getting behind in your backlog. So how you do is adjust the numbers to have that as a break even in 20 years. So
I don't see anything that, so it's got a dollar figure. So, funding adjusted, need adjusted, the balance, but I don't see anything on the y-axis that tells me what we're talking about as far as funding.
So I pulled all that off. I mean, I sort of showed this just as an example of, so the red lines show basically investments needed when we get to a point in time where a piece of equipment is deemed beyond its life cycle. We're not going to wait until just one point in time to replace everything, right? So the idea is that you replace things over time, and the green is basically that funding that you need to be able to consistently replace your infrastructure over time. The red are those big sort of timelines and or points in time where you need to make an investment or a change based on the end of a useful life of a piece of equipment or a building or whatever. So this is just an example of sort of how to spread that out over time to be able to get to a break even of addressing our backlog.
And I'll just say I was also confused by this when Mr. Adams showed it to me, so don't feel bad. But if you look at the bottom, the little table down there, you can see about $3.7 billion in infrastructure, buildings, facilities, and then below that, the $517 million, as Mr. Adams said, that has grown and will continue to grow, and that's the deferred maintenance that we're looking at there. So those are kind of the highlight numbers on the slide.
Just the last thing I would say on this, though, this is how the consultants look at this. This is not just specific. Like, they look at obviously every facility. They look at it from MCPS specific perspective. But how it's developed is it's basically compared against all facilities across the nation, right? I mean, this isn't something that's just isolated to MCPS. And I would say, while we hear testimony around challenges, our buildings are actually really good compared to the rest of the country. They actually have not seen, and that FCI number is basically it basically says, how bad are your buildings? Do you need to replace more, or can you just maintain? And we have one of the lowest of most school districts that they've measured, which is really good, which means we do invest in our schools. We do maintain our schools. We have challenges. We have deferred maintenance, which you can see, but I think comparatively speaking, we have done a really good job of being able to maintain our facilities, and we have facilities that meet the expectations of not only the state, but expectations of federal government around how schools should look and function.
Yeah, and I would just second that. As I mentioned yesterday when we were sitting around the same table, I've worked in a couple different school districts and worked with many, many across the country, and we really do have fabulous facilities in Montgomery County. Not that there's not work that needs to be done, but it really is much better than most other school districts I've seen around the country.
All right, next slide. So we wanted to dive into school security and sustainability initiatives. School security, obviously we talked about this the other day. This does represent an increase in the CIP around this area of infrastructure. We break this down into the perimeter controls, outdoor protective measures, indoor protective measures. And as we've talked about, there's things such as we call them BDAs. It's the building, it's basically the way first responders communicate within buildings. We're making a big investment in making sure that all of our facilities, not just new facilities, meet the highest level of code standards around that. We're looking at, obviously, the cameras. We're looking at, exterior lighting projects, electronic controls. We heard a lot about, the ability to have electronic access, surrounding a building, not only exterior but interior. We're looking at those areas. A big important element that we are focused on with these funds are integrating a lot of these systems. Right now, we have a lot of standalone systems. Our PA is a standalone, our access control is standalone, our cameras are standalone. The work that we're focused on is how do you integrate that? Mr. Hall has challenged us with the idea of if a door is open anywhere, an exterior door is open on a building, we need to know immediately. So we actually have the capabilities, right? We have the capabilities to figure out how to make that a reality and how to send those notifications. So we're moving in that direction, but this funding will allow us to get there from an implementation strategy. So actually a really exciting category here, and I know Dr. McKnight has really challenged us to think innovatively about this. So we're excited this one is being recommended. And then obviously when we talk about sustainability initiatives, this is a big jump. This is the only category that was cut in the last CIP, which again I think is a little disappointing when we are aligning ourselves with the county climate action plan. But the idea with this additional funding is to move us in an area where we're being much more proactive in our photovoltaic arrays to get us closer to bringing more and more net zero schools into service. Right now, our PV approach is to work with providers. Basically, they own the PV and we buy power from them. What we want to do with this is start to transition into us, generating power and providing power back to the utilities from a net zero perspective. So that's just one category. There's a couple other pieces of part of sustainability that will be pretty high impact, but we wanted to highlight that as a big part of this additional funding.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Madam President. I see Ms. Edwards might be here too. Can you let us know with the camera, because here we talk about security and camera, where are we with all the installation? We got grants, we got money, so where are we? Because that is one issue we constantly hear about when we go out to the community.
I think Ms. Edwards is going to come down and talk about that one.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Edwards.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. How are you? So I'll give you a high-level overview without having the details, the specific details. If you remember, I want to say maybe it was 2 years ago, the board included $250,000 as an accelerator for cameras within the budget. That was one to really focus on the elementary schools that either had 0 cameras or they had 1 to 2 cameras. The focus was to be able to kind of create a level of equity across the district, because when the cameras originally came in, they were at the secondary level. And so knowing that we needed additional funds to support that, the other evening, Mr. Adams talked about there was money included in the CIP budget to support the cameras, but we also had a grant from the State Department that was a total of about $1.5 million. My numbers might be rusty, but it was around that amount that gave us the opportunity to be able to come into our elementary schools, make sure that they had the number of cameras that they needed, but then also then start to look at some of the locations that didn't have enough cameras. So 3 things. Mr. Adams also shared that sometimes in schools where you may have needed cameras when your enrollment was 900 and now that it's 1,500 is a little bit different. That provides us an opportunity to do that. We also heard testimony from some families who said, we're not getting our cameras until 2025. That might be the case because even though we have the work in progress, what we also experienced was some supply chain issues in terms of the cameras coming in, but also working with the contractors who do not only the wiring, but the installation around it. What I can provide to the board a little bit later is kind of where we are in terms of the trajectory for the timeline for our schools, especially the ones who don't have, or the ones who may have had one or two. But we had created the phased-in approach. I think we had 3 phases that we utilized, but the time for some of the schools may be a little bit more elongated than others. But the primary focus is our elementary schools who really either had none or had 1 or 2. So it's three sources of funding that we had to pull together to really make sure that we did that.
So in your plan now, the last phase, when will we be done with the last phase?
I'll have to get back to you on that, Ms. Yang, just to be able to I'll provide a holistic overview around the whole implementation for the cameras.
Thank you.
And I'll just say, we had a plan. We have a plan. Originally, it was to have every school addressed by the end of this school year. And then, as Ms. Edwards said, that's kind of been pushed out by supply chain issues. But we do have a plan, and we can, follow up with the specifics about what that is currently looking like from a timeline perspective.
And just following that up, I think, and this isn't necessarily a capital issue, but the delays that we've experienced, I think what our communities want to know is, well, in the interim, what are we doing to make sure that we are aware of what's going on around our buildings to keep our students and families and staff safe? So, and like I said, I don't know that that's a capital issue, but, and I did want to ask a question. So the school security, and I think having this comprehensive plan is so important. And the expanded integrated systems, that's visionary, and that's where we need to go. And I'm wondering if we did hear on Monday and Tuesday night some concerns, especially in NEC schools, about dead zones in schools. And I think we also heard a lot about that a year ago at BCC. So will this work help to address realizing these buildings were built long before Wi-Fi and cell service were just part of the 24/7, 365 of life. And so does this help to address the quote-unquote dead zones where people don't have service if they need to make an emergency call or something like that?
Sure. So I believe at the testimony, there was also addressed why, providing cell phone coverage in schools is challenging. Actually, older schools might be better than newer schools. The newer schools are so tight in terms of our energy work that it does become a challenge. But one of the things that we did mention is that I guess it will be in December, we will be bringing to you this concept of an alert management system that basically would supersede any need for cell phones or any of the personalized piece, but it will be a more of a comprehensive approach to, regardless of where you are in the building or around the building, to be able to notify and have people know exactly where you are and what the challenge is something that we're looking into. And then even obviously where that goes beyond, that's just sort of first step. When we talk about this implementation strategy of having all these forms of security coalesce and become one, we do see products out there that are evolving that will even further help in those situations.
Maybe we're looking at this, but a model that comes to my mind just from my own personal experiences, healthcare facilities have sort of cracked that nut a long time ago, where we have to make sure every single person working in a building is accessible and can communicate all the time. And I don't know if you've looked at how the healthcare industry, and that's in facilities of all ages and sizes, so that's just putting that out there.
Okay. I'm excited that when we bring this piece to you in December, we can have a robust conversation. And I think hopefully it will closely align. And actually, it's a product that's being used by many other school districts. So while other industries sometimes have success moving in different areas of technology for education and the purposes of what we're trying to solve. Some of these companies have really developed these nuanced products that we'll be excited to bring and have some robust conversations. But I do believe it's going to solve some of the challenges that you mentioned.
And, with cell phone service, it's tough. There's not a lot of, we don't have a lot of control over that. So what we're doing is making sure that we have Wi-Fi throughout our buildings so that is accessible and people can use that. The repeaters, as Mr. Adams mentioned, so that when first responders go in, their radios work throughout the buildings regardless of where they are, and then the alert system. And so that we are addressing this from multiple angles, specifically cell phones, and we see it in this building, even in this room. It's just a challenge, and that is something that's a little bit out of our control. And so we're looking at all of these other measures that we can put in place that we do have some control over.
In addition to what's been mentioned, can you give some more examples of what the indoor protective measures are?
So yeah, the indoor piece is obviously cameras that are inside. It's the electronic lock systems. We have 2 schools that we're moving away from the keys, more of electronic process where the idea with that is that, assuming doors are locked consistently, but you have the ability to lock down an entire school regardless of what's happening remotely. There's a lot of different technology pieces that are going on. Other indoor protective measures, we've talked about this before. It's called CPTED, but it's basically crime prevention through architectural design. We have some older facilities that have line of sight issues, so going in and modifying and removing some of those barriers is part of this work.
I know that you have looked at pilot or are piloting or have studied other school systems that are piloting, for lack of a better word, weapon detection infrastructures. Is that, how far along in the looking at are we with that?
So we've been looking at that for a while, since I got here. And we haven't found anything that really meets our needs. So there's, the weapon detections devices, a company called Evolve that we looked into, where it's not a metal detector, but it looks for, objects of a certain density and a certain shape, size. The challenge with that is even the company itself advertises that they can get about 900 people through the system per hour. So you can imagine a high school of 3,000 kids trying to get people in the morning. It's just not feasible. And just as a side note to that, I actually went to a baseball game this summer where they were using one of those and was in a line of about 50 people. It took about 30 minutes to get 50 people in. They had about 6 people manning the system, and so it takes an incredible amount of people power. The technology just isn't quite there. One of the other things that we've looked at that is even newer than that is something where they plug in through our existing camera systems and use AI to detect things that look like guns. The challenge with that, of course, is that it only works once the gun is in the school and out where the camera can see it. And so I'm not sure how proactive that is. But yes, we continue to look at all the different options. And as technology, including AI, continues to develop, I think there will be in the near future, hopefully, some new technologies that might meet our needs. But with the current landscape, we just haven't found anything for a school system of our size and with schools of our size that would work for us.
Thank you.
Yes, hi. The other night when we were having the CIP hearings, one of the school, I know we have other similar school, Beverly Farm mentioned that from their playground entering to the school, the door doesn't have our, I guess, swipe card to re-entry, so that they have to go around the building to the side door to enter the building. Are we doing this kind of work where we are with this kind of work? Because that will be a security concern in an emergency situation.
And I'll start. I think Ms. Edwards certainly will chime in on this one. But what I would say is the access control for years has been designated to just 2 doors at our facility. So we would have it at the main door and then on a back door that was predominantly used maybe by PE or by recess purposes. The idea of expanding that to all doors at the time was not in the budget or wasn't even feasible from an implementation standpoint. But as we've worked with individual schools around, is that truly the only operational approach to that building? And if it is, then expanding access control to additional doors is something that we've looked into. But that's the first time I've heard about Beverly Farms and an issue with that, but certainly something that we can explore.
I agree with Mr. Adams. Initially, it was for 2 doors. As schools grow, management needs change or different placements and use of rooms, those things do occur. What we'll do is we'll follow up with that school. There is also a process our schools can go through to request for us to come and take a look to see if that is possible, but there is a cost associated with that. So we definitely want to make sure that in terms of if that request is coming through, we want to understand what that need is for, and if the management is the best use of how that flow of traffic is coming in, and if we actually want to use that door. Okay.
And just following up on that, I know we talked about a similar issue at Woodacres last year when I went and met with the principal, and they do have the 2 doors with the access as you've described, but one of the doors was off of sort of a side around the building, and it wasn't really where the students were going to play, so it was not convenient. Have we been able to do anything about that?
Yeah, Woodacres, there was a sort of an additional challenge created by when we built the addition. So we have looked at that. Again, in other areas, not just cameras, even these access control systems are backed up. So I know we reviewed that and that was approved, but I do not think it's been installed yet. So we certainly follow up and provide you with a timeline for that additional access control entry point.
Yeah.
Let's continue.
All right, next slide, please.
So the next two items are like new project, and the first one is CSC modification. This is a Carver Educational Service Center, which is this building, and the fund will be used to start designing to address the facility renovation of this building, and then creating the county-wide welcome center for parents and students. And this welcome center could include like international enrollment office, employee and retirement service center, and the fingerprintings. And then once design is completed, the additional funding will be requested for the future CIP for implementation of the actual plan. And then there is actually a plan for the county-wide county BRT hub will be created in front of this first parking lot of the this building. And then so we are actually like start working on the design of the plan, and then that is creating more like welcoming like transportation hub. So I think it's going to be a very good welcome center for school as well. And then the next one is a healthy school, which is for the IAQ project. And this is actually provide matching fund for the state's healthy school facility fund programs. And then this includes like HVAC, plumbing and roofing system, and even like replacement of windows to improve the learning environment for all the schools.
I'm just going to jump in there and say I'm so excited about what we're going to do here in this building. It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad that we just stuck to it and decided to go ahead and put it in the budget. We're always thinking of our schools and trying to do what we need to do for our schools, but I think it's really important to also think about this building. It has a lot of rich history, and we want to bring more people into the fold to come here. So I'm glad that we're going to be doing this. So thank you, Seth, for trying to figure it out for us, right? We knew it was going to be tough, but we got it. So happy about that.
Yeah, and it's so important, this work, because where we currently have our international enrollment office, it's so inconvenient and so inaccessible. And this is not.
Right.
This is, sort of robustly served by transit, and it will be a facility that is truly welcoming, but it's also one that our families can get to. So, yeah, so it's such important work.
Could you talk a little bit about the phasing of the renovation of this building?
Sure, and I was just actually going to add the, as we talked about, the BRT plan to possibly put a transit that would intersect 355 and Beers Mill corridor here would be a huge opportunity, again, to get families from all over the county here. So that's one of the areas I think we as a school system could be very supportive of another CIP project in the county to say this is critical. But in terms of the timing, as we mentioned, there were some initial designs around the BRT. One thing we advocated for was that BRT station would allow sort of an entryway not only into MCPS from a welcome center, but also the college. So I know the college has been involved in that, but what we talked about was there has to be a history aspect to this. So, one of the things they started to think about was, not only how do we acknowledge, how do we respect, how do we let people know the history of Montgomery County from sort of this entryway into a welcome center. So I believe we're going to be able to do some work to prepare for that within our building. I think funding is going to be dependent around the county for the BRT piece, around how that sort of is addressed and how it fits into the fold here. But the idea here is that if the funding is approved in FY25, we could start to come in. We already know some of the major infrastructure changes that we need to make here. We cannot make them while people are in the spaces, so we'll break this into manageable chunks to be able to do the renovation and bring it up to current code, and then phase it out. So I anticipate this would be a multi-year project, and hopefully align well with the BRT transit work as well.
Thank you.
All right, next slide. And so here's I guess we call it the other facility issues. But the first one is the bus parking piece. So part of this CIP recommendation, and I think we've all heard about the Shady Grove challenges. I think we're well beyond a decade of when that work was approved by the planning department. One of the challenges, obviously, is as a tenant of that, we were not necessarily involved in the planning process or the approval of the plan. But I think that goes back to the relationship piece that we talked about the other day. We're now in a place where we can talk, where we have a partnership with the planning so that plans aren't developed to move infrastructure with no place to send that infrastructure, right? So, that's something that I think as the county has learned, and hopefully it will never happen again. But the idea here is that we will start to look at a distributed model. Again, not saying that's what's going to happen, but look at it from a distributed model. There are no locations that will fit that Shady Grove fleet. I think we start from that. There's not a place in the county that will fit that's zoned appropriately for that to happen. So the county executive and team, executive branch, have really pushed us to see, are there distributed models that we can look at similar to other districts. Not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but we felt it was important for us to do the due diligence, to talk about it, to do an evaluation of what it means. There's pieces to it that will contradict some of the things we're doing. I would say, sustainability policy being one, right? Going in and adding additional paving and adding additional impervious areas in order to park buses at schools. The impacts on communities, lighting, light pollution, all the things that we sort of talk about, we'll have to walk through and navigate. But we want to be well prepared so that if challenged with the idea of moving, that we have our communities well informed around what that would look like and what it would mean. So this work is to do that study and come back to the board with an update. The other piece, and the team is here obviously to talk about the details of this, because I'm definitely not the subject matter expert, but the Mid-Atlantic Innovation Center. we have, I believe you all received a presentation back in 2022 just around digital innovation and the ideas that were evolving from student testimony and advocacy around STEM, robotics. The idea is that as that work has been building over time, they are now at a point where we need a facility. And so the approach here, the recommendation is to look at this from possibly a rent approach, look for a facility that can house our programs that can serve students throughout the county. So geographically, it's going to be really important where this is located. But this funding request would identify a location, would provide the funding for the initial lease, the funding for the initial build out, and then the lease over time. So we think this is a really good use of funds within the technology modernization project, and one that hopefully can really move the needle on that digital learning that you've been presented and we've been talking about for a couple of years now. The last thing I actually just wanted to say, I wanted to go back to the cell tower piece and the cell service, and I think some of these sort of they come together. We hear testimony, and the bus parking sort of reminded me to talk about this, but we hear testimony around we need cell service in our schools. But to do that, you need cell towers and cell providers. And I would just remind the board that we have been encouraged not to allow cell towers to be newly constructed on our school sites. So I just say that because there's a lot of things that the initial concept sounds good, but when you start to spread it out across the overall landscape, it sometimes creates some additional challenges, and it's important to really make sure we look at it holistically and come to compromise. Bus parking is that ideal situation as well, right? So there's some that say move, just put them at schools, and then once we go out to look at it from a school perspective, you're going to get the total opposite response. So I think these are important topics that need to be discussed, but it's important to really do that study, that homework up front, and be able to provide that information for you to be well informed for any future decision making.
Thank you for that comment, because I was thinking about, I know cell towers are kind of taboo, so I was like trying not to create any craziness, but it's kind of a no-win situation, so anyway, but thank you for always just having the ability to explain what our community needs to know and understand, particularly around the work that just needs to be done. So I will ask you if you can continue to do that, because it is so helpful. And I'll just say that, yes, at the work session on Tuesday, people came up to me and commented how helpful it was for you to share and explain. I'm going to get it wrong, but it was, I think it was about wanting to put fences or do something on property that's not actually ours. And so you were saying that we can only go but so far. So how you just kind of broke it down and just kind of gave us a lesson. People came up to me afterwards and said, oh, that was so great. Like, we didn't understand and we didn't know that. So that was really helpful, and it helped us to understand and know. And there's always so much that we're putting into place and we're planning, like what Ms. Edwards was up here talking about, the plan that we had in place and the money that we put in the budget for security cameras. I remember that, right? But it's like when you get into the next budget cycle, when people come forward, like that's not always your first thought. That, so I said to you, I know we have something in place, right? And so I just think it's just important to constantly remind our community that their concerns and the issues that they have around safety and security are the same concerns that we have. Their concerns around buildings that are energy efficient, user-friendly are just the same concerns that we have. And so they were always being thoughtful about all the work that we're doing. Let me just ask you one question about the bus parking, because I could be off a little bit, because I do know that what you're saying is always right. People want us to do all these different things, and some of the ideas and suggestions that they give us are just not conducive to what we need to do. Do we need to, I think about the time when it was a different planning board, when we took the planning board on a bus trip to Snowden Farms, just have a conversation for all of us to take a look at the property and just talk about their thoughts and their ideas as to what we should be doing. And in turn, we talked about, well, this is what we're thinking when we do this. Is there is that something that we would need to kind of show them? Do they need to be looped in a little bit to kind of see where our bus depots are, like where they're at, what they look like, and how we think it should be or could be is actually not. Sometimes it's like seeing is believing. Like you see better when you get an idea. But do we need to bring them into the fold of this? Because you touched a little bit on. I don't want to get us all off, but I do feel like it's important for people to know some of the work that we're doing with the planning board and how we're meeting with them regularly, and how when we met with them at our annual meeting, it had to be back in October, what I appreciated hearing some of the planning board talk about is how they're trying to do their due diligence and come to our community engagement meetings to hear what residents are saying so they can get an idea and get a feel for what's being discussed and how they can take that back with them to be informed. So I was just thinking about all this that we're doing. We can't do this by ourselves, right? We need the funding sources to understand why we're doing this. I just didn't know if I was overthinking it. Like, do we?
No, that's actually a good point. I mean, so that's the idea around the funding for this study, is that we can bring various agencies together, including the planning department. I think it's somewhat simplistic just to say, well, we'll move the buses, right? Move the buses. The reality is our schools are embedded in communities. We're not in commercial zones. We're not industrial zones. We're in neighborhoods. So people seeing, understanding, and putting their eyes on, what a bus operation looks like at 4 a.m. In a neighborhood, I think it's going to be eye-opening for those that are making those recommendations. I think also from a planning board perspective, the Board of Education has no authority over zoning or where things go. But when you look across the county of how we're zoned, it's beginning to really be almost all residential. So with no acknowledgement of major infrastructure. So it's not just the school system. The county Department of Transportation struggles with the same thing. So really just taking a step back and saying, hey, we actually need infrastructure. We need places for infrastructure, and we need to think differently about how our county will grow and evolve. So I very much appreciate where we've come with the planning board, and I think with the new planning, they just appointed a new planning director who has been a really good ally with the school system for many decades. I think we're definitely headed in a really positive direction with the Board of Education aligning closely with the planning board moving forward.
I think so too.
Ms. Yang?
Yes, I too want to express appreciation of you elevating the complexity of many of these issues, surrounding the buses or uses of buildings, existing inventory of our buildings that are not currently being used. I have a question about the Mid-Atlantic Innovation Center. Great idea. It will be a dream for us to come true. I want to hear a little bit more, and I also want to know from the facility side, have we considered some of the empty buildings that we now own? Would any of those will be feasible, or would that match this vision? Yes. Hi, good morning. Good morning. Hi.
So maybe I'll just start from a facility standpoint, and then talk about all the good things. So I think when you hear innovation center, the facility makes a difference, right? Having an innovation center, be it a facility that matches the work around technology and robotics, is going to be important. So we are going to look at everything from our inventory to possibly commercial options. We've also been talking with developers, as developers continue to build out. I would just say things like Lake Forest, are there opportunities to partner with a development to be able to provide these types of spaces is going to be important. But yes, facilities will make a difference, because when you hear Dr. Trenkamp's vision around this, I think just seeing it and being a part of what it means from a visual standpoint is going to be really important. So,
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm really excited about this topic, so thank you for bringing it up. I was sitting there hoping that you would, hoping that it would make the conversation today. So we started talking about this actually quite some time ago. So we'll take you back to April 7th, 2022, about a year and a half ago, at the board table in response to our students who had been testifying about wanting a space, needing a space for their robotics. And it was many different robotics clubs represented in the boardroom that day, speaking about that need, not just a place to build their robotics and engineering process, but to also test it and then go back and refine it, and then come together in multiple teams to compete. And they needed that space, dedicated space, and they were finding challenges all along that engineering cycle. In addition to that, since that time, we've also talked about the expansion of access to STEM, STEAM, because the digital arts is a piece of that, the STEAM experiences. So whether that be drone technology with the unmanned flight pilot's license certification, whether that be access to esports and college scholarships. We're in partnership right now with University of Maryland and other organizations, local organizations, to bring an esports league to Montgomery County Public Schools, which launched this fall. In the first week of December, we'll have the first season. We'll have a culminating experience at 15 West Coody, where our high schools will come together and the teams will compete in an esports program. But we would have a dedicated space for that, where our students and our staff can come to this center within the school day and beyond the school day to learn and experience the digital arts and the science and technology experiences. So as part of this center, there would be what we'd call a dirty lab, which is your industrial lab equipment for building, whether that's shop or digital signs. There would be laser cutters and laser printers. We also would have many 3D printers where students would be designing and 3D modeling and doing that. We've seen where we would want to incorporate 3D food printing. So when you think about science and technology now, it's in our food industry now, and how they design chocolates and other food and actually do the 3D printing with that. Digital arts and studios would be there. So lots of different spaces for staff to come and learn. We found that when we've had many of our board meetings, we've talked about how staff, as part of their career ladder, would like to have opportunities to come and learn how to do these things so that they could then offer courses or extended day programs for the students back at their school. So this would be a place for that. And we've really targeted it as a Mid-Atlantic center, because what we found is there is no center like this on the East Coast. We did visit a center very similar to what we're envisioning in Columbus, Ohio. We took a team out there, the curriculum office and folks from my team went and spent a day there. It was a long day, but we spent and really learned a lot and saw what was possible, and really came back and got to work on this vision. So we do have some slides, we have some research, and it's really grounded in what we've heard from our own students and staff around what they need in order to really grow this expansion of STEAM access and ability, not just for our district, but being a model for the Mid-Atlantic, where we could invite adults, other educators, other students into this space, and really show, engage in competition, engage in learning, and really be a model of excellence here on the East Coast.
That sounds wonderful. And if we can partner with existing one, right, like Lake Forest, they are working on North Bethesda, White Flint area. If there are any of those possibilities, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Is there a cost to this? And where is that?
Yes, so this increases the technology modernization PDF by $5.4 million. So $2.115 million in FY25, and then carrying forward, basically assuming a lease over the course of the following years. And remember, technology modernization is in the CIP, but it does pull from current revenue, so we're able to put that lease cost in this particular program.
Thank you. If we could continue.
All right, next slide. This is a discussion slide, so if there's,
We've been
we
asking
can keep going.
Let's finish the slides.
Actually, I do have a question. And this, I'm not sure where to put this, given the content here, but I did just want to put out there again, as I look at, looking at our capital projects, and there's lots of reasons that we have capital projects. Capacity is often advanced as one. And yet, when I look at especially our elementary schools, we have, 137 elementary schools, and most of them are not over capacity. Some of them are massively under capacity, and then yet we have some that are massively over capacity. And so I'm just trying to look very big picture at how we are spending, our fiscal health and the limitations we have on our capital budgets. Because I really do see that we need to be very proactive about addressing capacity challenges without construction projects. And, we've talked about just in the past couple of days, both the Wooten and the Whitman cluster elementary schools, where we see in the Wooten cluster, all of them under capacity, most of them massively under capacity. And in Whitman, we have, one school, the Burning Tree, that's over capacity, has significant facility, just because of when it was built, challenges, and which I very much understand. But we also have significant capacity in that cluster. And so, nobody ever wants to talk about, the realignment of catchment areas, but you can't talk about, people can't target the school system and target the Board of Education about how we spend our money if they aren't willing to have the conversations we need to have to spend that money well. And because so many of our, not at the high school level, definitely, but definitely at our elementary school level, most of our capacity issues could be handled without building any capacity. So I just want to put that out there, because I think it's time for us to really have that conversation in a very intentional way.
And we did recently with Westbrook, Bethesda Elementary, and...
Yeah, but I'm
just saying it's not
Yeah.
out of the question, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important topic. One that certainly, could certainly be taken up by the board. It's not part of the superintendent's recommendation. But I would also say, anytime you think about boundary studies and service areas, particularly at the elementary school level, elementary schools, I think sometimes can be different than our secondary schools. I actually saw on the news this week that there was some major concerns in DC around students going to a swing space school 3 miles away from their current school. And so the environment of moving outside of your individual community, I think, is growing concern. Not to say that it's an easy answer, but I do think the landscape, particularly at elementary schools, even what we heard from the boards commissioned, boundary analysis was that community, proximity, geography, particularly at the elementary, is really important. It's a tough one. It is a tough one to navigate. So I do think in this CIP recommendation, we're trying to look at every facility, and if there is room, can you couple something there? Can you add a regional program? Can you add a blueprint element? Can you do things differently in order to keep it keep it operating and operating efficiently from both operating and capital. So I hope it doesn't answer your question completely, but I do think the superintendent's recommendation is trying to balance all of the issues, but service areas at the elementary schools, I think, is definitely a very delicate one, and certainly one that if there's any information the board would request or require, we would love to try to help and provide as much information as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Adams, for once again elevating the complexity of the issues, right? How we use our facility, the usage of facility, but also balancing many other factors that concern the well-being of our students and families. They are all important issues to discuss. And right now, we have a lot of boundary studies in the pipeline on our plate, and I thank your office for the tremendous work you are doing.
All right, next slide. So we'll dive right into the comprehensive maintenance plan. So this is an important one, and again, this is a little outside the capital improvements program, but I thought it was important that we talk about this because of the testimony that we hear is, I'd say, overwhelmingly maintenance work versus capital improvement work. But we have our maintenance and operations team has done a tremendous job of re-envisioning maintenance and operations. When we call maintenance and operations merged 2 years ago, what we used to call school plan operations and maintenance, basically building services and our maintenance, were separate. And there was a lot of finger pointing going on around well, who's going to fix this? How are we going to address this? So we merged that a couple years ago. And what we found is that not only merging was critical, but also modernizing every aspect of the work, from job descriptions to training programs to professional growth and development. And so that work has been ongoing in an attempt to move us from the position of reactive maintenance to preventative maintenance. And we're not done yet. A big part of the work, obviously, you heard about work order systems, how we analyze, real-time data in our schools, how that translates to, improvements that are experienced every day by our staff and students is where we're headed. One of the areas that we do think is going to be important, very important at some point in the very near future, is having a more of an HVAC background and person in every school to be able to navigate and manage these types of issues. We transitioned into more of a preventative maintenance where we share responsibility within clusters, but more and more we're finding that having someone that can support the schools in a very different way is likely an approach that we will have to pursue. And I'm not suggesting just adding 211 individuals, but really just realigning and being more efficient with what we have and how we do it is going to be important. But this just basically outlines the vision of where we're at and the work that goes into not only keeping our systems operating as long as they should, but also then trying to keep systems running that are well beyond their useful life. Unfortunately, the latter takes more time than actually keeping things up and running that are in their useful life. So that's why the intersection and the integration between capital and operating is so important. We want to spend our time stretching the life of systems versus spending most of our time just dealing with systemic complaints that just are almost impossible to resolve without replacing. So that is the vision for this program, and one that hopefully I think will be, we're not paving trails here, but one that I think not many school districts align their capital improvements program with their operating, and we hope that we're headed in the right direction to be successful there. Next slide, please. And this is a little hard to read, but the big, we wanted to identify budgetary, and this sort of goes both sides, but capital and operating, but really this idea of tools, training, and technology. As our systems have evolved, the amount of training, the amount of expertise, the amount of tools has been incredibly advanced. We actually went from actually, I probably don't it's hard to say this, but we just transitioned to smartphones for our techs a few years ago in order to allow them to be able to access information around our schools. And that's somewhat embarrassing for us to talk about, but we're actually further ahead than most, which is also scary in the public school system era. But if you can imagine, just think about your car. You know, we have been operating under this idea that, you know, you can go out, work on your car, change the oil, do all the things you want to do. Now we're in an era where you need to have tools to plug in. You need to have expertise in order to, you know, different types of expertise to navigate, you know, the challenges. That is the exact same thing that's happening in our buildings with our systems. So the amount of training, the amount of technology that we've had to invest in order to get us to a place where we can appropriately maintain and manage these buildings has been pretty tremendous. And we're only partially there. I mean, we have a ways to go. But one of the things we just really wanted to highlight from a critical item standpoint is that, you know, the further we fall behind, any reduction that we see in, let's say, HVAC replacement, roofing replacement, some of those things, you can almost guarantee it's going to translate into significant amount of time and money spent trying to just stretch the life or maintain the life of these buildings in order to you know, manage the situation. Even we talk about renting temporary equipment, the cost associated with not only, you know, renting the equipment, but having staff go and set it up, you know, make sure it's operating correctly, you know, bringing it back when it's you know, with the issues resolved. It's just a tremendous amount of effort and time that goes into that type of work, and that's why we want to move away from that model and into one where we're much more proactive, preventative, and highly aligned with our capital improvement needs. So I think we're in a really good place balancing our key facility indicators, our facility condition index, you know, all of that work with our request, and hopefully we'll start to see the fruits of those labor in the very near future. All right, next slide. And that's really it for that piece. If there's no discussion on that, I can go right into the next section if that's okay.
I have one quick question, and you know I am a huge fan of this comprehensive maintenance plan. I can't say enough how I think it's visionary. You mentioned something the other night, Mr. Adams. We had a lot of testimony talking about how we make our outdoor play spaces, how we adjust them to the warming climate. And several people talked about there's, you know, it's just out in the sun. The play equipment is hot to the touch, so hot the kids can't use it. And people were asking for, you know, shade structures, and you were actually mentioned that the better longer-term solution was kind of urban forestry, planting some trees. And I just wanted a little more information about that program, and also just to ask a question. There is a nonprofit called Casey Trees, which has done transformational work with urban forestry in partnership with DC Public Schools, and they're interested in moving into Montgomery County. And is this an organization that maybe you have had conversations with to maybe meet some of these goals around? Yeah.
And I have not personally, but I do believe, you know, we created the live infrastructure manager position within our organization and hired, and that individual has been amazing. I mean, very transformational for us as a school district, you know, creating partnerships with EPA, other private organizations. So I will certainly follow up with
Mr. Traubman?
Mr. Traubman, and see if he's been able to touch base with this group at all.
Yeah, and I can close loop. And I just want to give him another shout out. He's advising the Student Climate Action Council, but that event at Gaithersburg High School a week and a half ago was amazing. And, you know, they got 200 students from across the country, across the county, on a day that turned out to be, you know, not the best day weather-wise, but they planted a whole bunch of trees at Gaithersburg High School. It was a great event. Students really saw the importance of that work. And so I just want to give him a shout out, because I know that was his vision. And it turned out to be a great day.
Was that during out of school time?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to mention that.
All right, next slide. And And this will be the final topic for this work session. So as we mentioned, we were going to bring back the Northwood Woodward projects and just walk through some of the rationale behind the recommendation. So again, the reason for the one-year construction extension, as I mentioned, many times when we see what are considered delays, it's usually funding related. This is not the case. This is a one-year construction extension due solely from market conditions. You heard about the cameras, taking a little bit of time. If you think about that, just spreading that across the entire build of a brand new school, we're faced with, really unprecedented type of sort of reevaluation of how we build and when we build. So the elementary schools that we just opened this summer, 18-month construction schedules, a third of the size, probably even less than a third of the size, really struggled to finish in 18 months. And when I say struggle, we opened, but I wouldn't say it was as smooth and as minimally disruptive as we would like. And a lot of work had to continue following that. So when we think about a high school, and we looked at Northwood, we worked very closely with our contracting team, and the feedback overwhelmingly was we might make it, but the reality is there's many things that are out of our control, and you would need to plan for the reality that two-year build is not feasible. And so in discussions with Dr. McKnight, it really made sense to just transition to a 3-year build for Northwood to make sure it's as minimally as disruptive for our staff and students when they return. And not only that, but long-term planning. I mean, I think you heard overwhelmingly around this idea of that from a choice perspective, we just need to know and need to have the time. So this allows that forward notice. Families are now able to sort of take a step back and really reevaluate and look at things. So we think this was by far the best approach in terms of this particular project.
And I think Mr. Adams covered it, but just as we talk about being more transparent, we can say we're going to do it in 2 years knowing that we're probably not, or we can be upfront with the community and say, these days it's going to take 3 years.
And I appreciate us being upfront with the community, and I unless I heard wrong, I feel like while it's not what people want, they understand. But I was scared to say what you already stated is that if we can just try to make certain that people are able to make their choices and know in advance that would help to ease some of the pain for people. So thank you, Mr. Adams, for mentioning that, and Mr. Hall as well. Yep.
Yeah, and I did want to say, I think because the timeline of our projects, which has always been, we start talking about the need for something, and then we go and we appropriate, money for, site plans and designs, and it's a while before we would even conceivably break ground, and then you've got the length of time it takes to actually complete a project. I think we need to really make sure our communication and kind of community engagement piece around these projects has always tended to focus on the people in the school right then at that moment in time, which is almost never the population of people who are going to be affected. And so I think, and it came through with some of what we heard a couple weeks ago around the impacts on 8th graders right now and their choice application deadlines, and looking at what was going to be happening with Northwood and the DCC. And, we really need to, I think, saturate all the way down into our clusters the engagement around these kind of projects, because often it is really, you're talking about we're building a new high school. It's the kids that are in 2nd grade right now that are going to be the ones that are really impacted. And so that's why I think it's really key that we sort of shift our model a little bit to fully saturate information and put it in that way. So, when I was an elementary school parent, when you started talking about middle or high school stuff, I'm like, whatever, I'll get there when I get there. But if you start really talking about, when your kids are in 9th grade, this is going to be happening, and, really getting, framing it in that way, and then parents are like, families are like, oh, yeah, maybe I do want to have something to say about that. And yeah, just really making sure we are really viewing, as we're looking at our projects in the long term. I don't know that we always looked at the people that are going to be impacted by them in that same timeline. So, yeah.
And to Ms. Harris's point, people are thinking about all that now, and probably back then, maybe I just use myself as an excuse. I don't think I was, but nowadays people haven't even had children yet, and they're thinking about the schools and the location. So to your point, no, it will be good to rethink about how we do that.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Why don't you go ahead and finish the slide, and then we'll ask more questions.
Sure. So we talked about it from the 1 year perspective, and hear you loud and clear on the efforts to filter this down. The procurement evaluation. So this is also another important, because I talked about the cost. Costs are still climbing. Costs are still elevated above where initial budgets are coming in. So I just want to be very upfront in terms of what we have done throughout the process to be able to get to a point where we can start. I think you heard that from some of the community members. Starting is important, right? We need to start. So similar to our Poolsville experience, where we were caught very much in the middle of inflation, but breaking that project into two pieces and being able to start was incredibly important. So how we broke this up into pieces is options to consider sort of deferring costs at a later time depending on where the numbers come in. One of those options is construct the auditorium shell and revisit for additional funding to do the interior finishes at a later date. That was one of the options. We talk also about extending the timeline for completion of athletic fields. Northwood does include athletic fields as part of that work, but one option is to leave them as they are until we get to a point where we can ask for additional funds. The prevailing versus non-prevailing wage. We did bid this project both ways, prevailing, non-prevailing. I think the prevailing wage premium was in I think it was $17 million to go from just prevailing, you get nothing for that. It's just, it's a prevailing versus non-prevailing wage rate. The challenge with that is that from a state requirement, you would forfeit 25% of the state funding if you do not do prevailing wage. That's just one of those considerations. Another option around this process is just to request a supplemental appropriation. So if we're over budget, do we just go back to the county and say, hey, we need an additional, let's say, $17, $20, $25 million in order to move forward? And then obviously one option, which is the last option anyone would want to consider, but then defer the entire project until you have the entire amount of funds. So those are sort of the options of what we're faced with today. Just to give you a little bit of a snippet into this project. The numbers came in, the contractors have been working through the scoping process. The entire project was over budget with prevailing wage. I can easily say that. One option we looked at is if you went non-prevailing, we could build the entire project in its entirety. But that's something, obviously, we would have to work with our Office of Management and Budget. We would most likely forfeit about $30 million in state aid by going to a non-prevailing, which we would lose $30 million, but we would save about $20 million on the project, so net reduction of about $10 million in overall county funding. There is an option where we can start the project, build it as intended, and then ask for additional funding for that auditorium. And again, I think it's important to talk about that, not to sit here and say that we wouldn't build the auditorium, but the timeline in which we are talking about, we would have 2 years to work with the county to close the gap on $20 million. I think that's what we're suggesting, similar to like a Poolsville type of experience. So these are a couple of the things that we've talked about. The athletic fields does close the gap a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily close it all the way. So we would need to look at other options as well. But that's some of the procurement evaluation that we're currently going through, and that the idea is that we will bring back to the board some form of a contract approval in December in order for us to start on this. So I don't know if I necessarily explained that as clear as I should, but there's a variety of options that we're looking at to be able to start the project. And just as a summary, we do not have the money right now in the budget to do it in full with prevailing wage. So we have basically three options to move forward with. One option will be move forward with building the entire building, but just having the shell of the auditorium. One option would be to move forward with a non-prevailing wage. And again, we don't, the board and the MCPS does not dictate where the funds come from. That's a county function, but I have a feeling the county will push back a little bit on us forfeiting state aid. And then the third option is we just ask for the additional $25 million it would need to move forward with the project in full and entirety with prevailing wage. So those are the three options that we will certainly come back forward to you with. None of which are we suggesting that we will not build the Northwood in its full. It's just a matter of how we get through the procurement process and how we get started on the project. So just wanted to make sure I was really clear about that, because I know people may read these slides and have a very different reaction. The other piece, too, is just from a school community impact that we have to acknowledge and then we have to work through. Obviously, we are working, and a lot of information has already been distributed around the consortium choice process. A lot of emails have gone out to, a lot of families, a lot of resources, so that's in process. The thing that we're also going to have to contend with is that the additional year to build Northwood means Woodward is going to take that additional time to open, which means the schools that are going to resolve the capacity of that we will have to trend and watch that enrollment growth and most likely add additional relocatable classrooms because of that year delay. And then the obviously the one that's probably most evident, though, is that just working with those students and staff that will be at Woodward as part of the Northwood school community for that additional year. What does that mean around athletics, transportation, extracurriculars, all those things that just that added year adds to the complexities. And then obviously the non-capital recommendation piece to this is that with that 1 year delay, the board approved the timeline around the boundary study. Just remember that timeline that was approved by the boundary within that board approval allowed for a year and a half advance of the school opening to determine a boundary. If we kept that timeline as is, that would provide 2.5 years in advance. But what we are suggesting is that to give us a little more time to work through this with communities, because not only because of this, it's because Crown will be on the exact same timeline as well as Damascus and Clarksburg. So the discussion is really going to be around, do you have 3 independent boundary studies that are significant, sort of moving in different speeds, different paces, different progressions, or do you look at it in terms of, does it make more sense to have some commonalities among them so that you're not potentially doing something a little different here than you are there, or having different decisions. So these are the things that we want to explore and then come back to the board with more robust data and analysis for a recommendation this spring, which the spring amendments are in late February, but we would like to come back late February with really specifics around what the recommendation around the boundary timelines would be. So that's all we have for today. If there's any questions on this particular slide or project, certainly open the floor for discussion.
If I heard correctly at some of the hearings, folks were hinting at Crown with no current constituents somehow being delayed or finding savings there. Did I hear correctly?
So it was hard to sort of read around what some of the Crown comments were, but so maybe I'll just provide a different perspective. Crown is going to be in the exact same situation in terms of construction budgets as Northwood. So we're doing the exact same thing with Crown, looking at it from auditorium, deferrals to fields, all those things. So there's going to be funding. We're assuming, because Crown is going to be bid in the next month or two, similar financial challenges on that one. But from a boundary standpoint, when we look at the number of students being served by both schools, it's basically equal number of students that are being served by those schools. Crown obviously has, actually they're probably close to the same number of schools if you sort of individualize each school within the Down County Consortium. So I don't think there's any, I think the idea was that if there's not an individual group tied to the Crown community at this moment, maybe they're not as concerned with a delay if we need that funding. But the reality is, as a school district, we need that school to open. We need that school to open because of the overcrowding that we have at the schools that it's intended to relieve. So it's again, they're all competing interests, but at this point, Woodward, Crown, and expanded Damascus have equal importance. And, so we're not necessarily viewing it in terms of that. But if we do get to a point where county revenues are lower than what is anticipated, projects are coming in higher than where we initially budgeted, we will have to look at this in terms of what some of the non-recommended reductions or what some of the recommended reductions would be around shifting funding within the overall CIP to focus on priorities. Unfortunately, we have those three big high schools that are right there that need to start next year in order to maintain these timelines.
Thank you.
And I would just mention that next week, we were talking about Northwood and some of the challenges that we're trying to address and assuage concerns with the community about the holding school years. And I know next week there's a meeting, and Dr. Garrick has been doing a really good job of outreach around that and to address, among other things, the concerns about transportation. And so I'll be there. And I think transit, they reach out to Ride On and Montgomery County Transit to sort of look at very pragmatically what we can do to ensure that students who are going to school significantly away from where they live and participate, particularly the concerns are if they participate in activities that go beyond the school day, they're in athletics or theater or something like that, they have a way to get home. And so, yeah.
Or just miss the bus in the morning. Then what? What are they going to do?
Right.
Ms. Harris, I'm glad you brought that up. I visited Dr. Garrick the first week of school specifically for that reason, and he has started working with his transportation team to be able to talk about that, as well as really kind of getting feedback from his families regarding that. He started that in the summer. So we have that one on our horizon, recognizing that the holding school is quite a distance from Northwood. Children missing the bus, how do we do a sweeper to go back and pick up the students, but also recognizing we don't want to impact their extracurricular activities. On Wednesday of this week, we had our first meeting with MCDOT, the transit department, and when I say meeting, we had a collaborative meeting with them as well as our police partners. And so we have formalized some of our meeting structures there, so we have an opportunity to look at, I don't want to say a hybrid model, but how we're creative around a situation like that, because that is one of the larger concerns for students, staff, as well as the family. So it is on our horizon, and we've been planful around it.
Yeah, and I do want to give Dr. Garrick a shout out because he has been very proactive and thoughtful about this and pragmatic, looking at what are the existing bus routes that connect this area to that area and actually proposing to the county transit, could we, collapse these routes during these hours of the day? He's been very, very proactive and pragmatic about it. So I think he's been a really great leader for that school going through this period.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation today. I see on my calendar that on Thursday, November 16th at 5:30 p.m., we have a Facilities and Boundaries Decision meeting. Can you refresh our memories what will happen there?
So at that meeting, it will be an opportunity to, answer any remaining questions. We will provide the resolutions associated with formalizing the board's position on their capital improvements plan request. So we'll be able to read the resolutions if there's any changes needed to be made. Typically, we've made those changes to resolutions on the fly and approve it that day and ultimately move forward and allow you to send that transmittal over to the county executive.
Thank you.
You will vote.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.